So let me say welcome to you all, and I'm very happy to have you here, Vittorio, Yaroslav, and Fernando. My name is Ruud Meij, and I started these conversations basically when the war started in Ukraine. It's called Don't Give Up Ukraine. It's one of my colleagues in Ukraine who said, well, this should be the name. So it is no exchange money or something like that. No, don't give up Ukraine. It is an existential thing, and we should keep thinking this way. And what I'm trying to do is, let's say, every week on this time, someone who I know or who I appreciate from Ukraine, and of course now we are someone who I appreciate from Germany, America now, so Vittorio, to get in conversation. And the main thing is that someone of Ukraine should be here. So it's not about Ukraine, it's with Ukraine, and it's on Ukraine. And of course, one of our, well, we are now on day 36 of the war, if I count, if my counting is okay. And today, President Zelensky spoke to the Dutch Parliament. And he does that in an impressive way, always. So, and he even reminded one of our most historical days in our history, but most Dutch forgot. That's April 1, 1572, when in a very little town in our country, in the south of the Netherlands, Alpha lost his first, let's say, his first battle. So. And we called it on April 1, Alpha loses his classes. And this word classes refers to the name of the town. It's called Den Bril, and Bril is classes in Dutch. And I spoke to some guys today, and they were very impressed with that because they had forgotten that. That was a historical moment in Dutch history. So now coming to history and philosophy, now we are exactly at home. So my first a question of you, if you would, Vittorio and Yaroslav, and also Fernando, of course, shortly introduce yourself, a bit of your background, and then we get our conversation going. Vittorio, will you start?
Should not our guest from Ukraine start? Since this is about Ukraine, I think it's appropriate that our Ukrainian heroes speak first.
See,
I'm Ukrainian, but I'm not hero. The heroes are on the front. They're just helping or pretending, so to say. So my name is Yaroslav Hrytsak.
There are many fronts.
Yeah, I am professor of the Ukrainian Catholic University. The university that Ruud quite often attending for a while, I believe, for 10 years or so, and I'm teaching history. Basically, East European, Ukrainian history, but in large global context. That's it.
Yeah, and you also wrote this global history on Ukraine, eh? So just
that was my the recent book, the Global History of Ukraine. It's supposed to be translated in several languages.
Ah, good. That's always the problem with Ukraine, eh? So it's translation.
Somehow not all the people understand Ukrainian. I wonder why.
I also wonder why.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Vittorio? Eh?
Yeah, my name is Vittorio Hösle. I teach in the United States at the University of Notre Dame in the departments of German and Russian philosophy and political science. Perhaps my largest, best-known book is Morals and Politics, but I've written also a minor work in 2017, Russland 1917-2017, in which I included an essay published in 2015 in which I predicted, unfortunately, quite a lot of what is going on. And in fact, even in Morals and Politics, which was published in German in 1997, I said that it is not unlikely at all that Russia will go the way of Germany in the 1920s and 30s. That this is a likely development to be expected. I lived myself 4 months in the Soviet Union in 1990. I also came to Lviv, and since then I have kept a strong interest in all matters Russian, even if, alas, I do not know Ukrainian. So I have to wait for the translation of Yaroslav's book.
Okay, thank you very much. And is there any special relationship with Yuko? Because you told us that you received the vice rector of UCO last week? Yeah.
Yeah, he happens to be for this semester at the University of Notre Dame, and his wife and his daughter came to our house last week. I have met him also on other occasions on campus. Our university has built strong relations with UCNC. A few years ago, Volodymyr, the dean of the social sciences faculty, came to us, and several of our professors have been at UCNC. I myself was supposed to come in the last 2 years, but the pandemic, of course, prevented that.
Yes, yeah, the same with me, so to say. So UCO is I call it all UCO. I don't know why, but it's a strange attractor, eh? So to say.
Yes.
Fernando.
Yes, so I'm assistant professor at the University of Humanistic Studies, a colleague of Ruud Meij, and I'm a professor for philosophy, especially for ethics and sustainability. And yes, so it motivated me to organize things with Ruud, because I really felt very uncomfortable with this war. I also had read these books of Vittorio Hösle, so I was fearing the worst. I must say that I'm now a bit, I feel a bit better because I see that the heroic defense of the Ukrainian people is stopping Putin. I hope so. But at the first days, I thought they would overrun Ukraine and be in a couple of weeks in the east of Europe. So I was fearing that also because we have an exchange also with the Baltic states, our university. So I didn't know whether I should continue this, but this is my situation.
We know each other a long time, Fernando.
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you. So Yaroslav, could you take us a bit to Lviv today? How is Lviv, and also Ukraine, but how is Lviv today?
Lviv is probably nowadays one of the safest places. Even so, we have alarms regularly every day. I don't remember we have an alarm today because we just get used to it. Yeah, so we has been bombarded, not bombarded, but in the vicinity. They hit the military base.
Yes.
A week ago or so, and the last weekend they hit. How should I say? One of the. It's hard to describe. I don't know in any language, Ukraine, how we could describe it. But basically, it was like a oil tank. They destroyed the oil, so to say. So they're hitting deliberately the infrastructure, logistics. And we just discussing why would be that. There are two hypotheses. One hypothesis that maybe they're planning attack from north of Ukraine, which is closely to us, from Belarus, which is Volhynia and Galicia. And therefore they're destroying oil, which could be very gasoline, which could be very important for military purposes. Or second, and this is probably also very important, that we have now facing social economical problems because the significant part of territory of economy is destroyed. And one of the most important things is the harvesting, the sowing. And to have this kind of sowing, you also need a kind of gasoline and oil. Yes. So, but anyway, it looks like, I mean, judging from Lviv, judging from ours, was from one place, they are ready for the longer war, for long of attrition, which means they're destroying deliberately the logistics and the economic infrastructure. But that said, again, we are rather safe. We had a lot of refugees, several waves of refugees, but nowadays they're gone. They're already in Poland or some other places. So what else could I say? And I'm at the Catholic University. Actually, I'm very glad, I'm happy to be there because this is one of the best universities in terms of self-organization. Everything works like a clock, like a Swiss clock, which means that we're volunteering a lot. We have every morning we're starting with the meeting of our headquarters. So we're just defining our problems, what we to do. So basically, we have I'm not saying we're optimistic, but we have on a very positive mood.
Yeah, a positive mood.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. it's a book of Terry Eagles that it's called Hope Without Optimism. So it's not optimism, but the hope is there.
Oh, not the irony, but probably one.
No, I don't mean it as irony.
No, but probably the one thing that I want to solve. One of the amazing fact, that the opinion poll reveals that overwhelming majority believes that Ukraine is moving in the right direction. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Because they believe in the victory.
Yeah, they believe in victory. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's very encouraging, I would say. Thank you. And would you say that, well, you already said something about the mood, that you believe in the victory and you believe you are encouraged in that?
It's not, we have no doubt. Anything could happen theoretically, but we have little doubt. The only thing that concerns me is the price that we are going to pay.
Yeah, of course.
Because the price would be very high. It's already high, but could be even much higher. Because what judging by the military experts, and there are several that they could recommend, most of them telling that this war is for a long period.
Okay. Fernando, you want to answer?
Yes, because this triggered a question, and I would like to ask Yaroslav what this could mean, a victory of Ukraine. What exactly would that mean? Would it mean that we get into the Donbass and
no, it's very hard. Yeah, I understand. Thank you. It's very hard to judge because every military expert says that concept of victory progresses with the war. Yeah, that's realistic, so to say. Yeah. So nowadays, for us, probably the biggest success will be to stop the war immediately. So the frozen. It won't be that kind of definitive victory, but at least we will diminish our price, and basically we are winning. We are on the winning side, but still we don't want to pay the war. So this is the real minimum. But yes. maximum will be returned to pre 214 borders, which means Donbass and Crimea, plus perspective of the EU and NATO membership. Yeah. So this will basically for us mean war, and by definition, defeat of Putin. Defeat of Putin. I mean, the end of the Putin regime. But basically, we believe that one will win. It would mean automatically, not probably in the short run, but in the long run, the defeat of Putin regime.
Well,
yes.
So within this range, between maximum and minimum.
We can talk about that afterwards.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Fernando, we agreed that you already asked an opening question, but you would ask the opening question for our.
Yes. So okay. Thank you. Just a general question, because in fact we wanted to also speak a bit about the consequences of this whole war with Ukraine and Putin for Europe and the future of Europe and the future of Ukraine in Europe and the relationship of Europe and the Ukraine. And so in fact I have three questions which I'm just wondering. For example, if we look at Putin, why he started the war, and I've read the book of Vittorio, but if I look what is said by him on television, he's still thinking in geopolitical terms, I would say. So this is his way of thinking. He's a geopolitical thinker, I would say, and he is only thinking in the sense of spheres of influence, I would say. And he seems to be obsessed with the idea of neutralizing Ukraine. And neutralizing Ukraine means for him that it cannot be part of NATO, but it can neither be part of the European Union. So there must be some very big fear there in his mind. So I was wondering, what is he in fact fearing from Europe and in fact from the European Union, because he has had a lot of commercial connections the last years, which benefited also his kleptocrats. So I cannot imagine what he is fearing. In fact, what is his most deepest fear? And of course, you could say, yeah, he doesn't want to have democracy. He doesn't want to have a system of rights, human rights in Russia. But what does it matter if this is then the case in Ukraine? What does it matter for him? So I see there is a kind of hate or fear there, and I ask myself, why is it that? Where does it come from? And on the other side, I was also very astonished on the Ukrainian side, because they keep hoping and loving Europe, even if we are doing, in my eyes, we are not doing much. So we are certainly not doing the most we can. So I wondered where this motivation comes from to keep and still love Europe as an ideal, whereas we see that it is almost impossible for Europe to do anything. And I even wonder whether we have the means to, whether we have the weapons to do that, or the organization to do anything. So this could trigger Europe to have another constitution in the future, to create a kind of federate state or something like that. Maybe it's just very temporary, this, but these are two questions. Why is Putin so fearful, and why is Ukraine so hopeful in this situation? And I was thinking, because also in the time of Brexit, I was thinking, what could Europe do? Because we don't have weapons. In fact, we don't. Europe, Holland, for example, only has one tank. And I think they have it from in a lease construction from the German army. So we really don't have many weapons in Europe. And so I was thinking, what could we do other than sanctions, which also are limited? And in the Brexit time, I thought of, for example, creating a kind of pass of citizenship that we could give to people, the remainders of the Brexit, for example, in the Brexit discussion. We could give the remainders who wanted to remain in Europe a kind of citizenship of Europe. Okay, maybe this is a dream.
Fernando is the same. You get questions, but you get hidden an opinion. Eh? So
yes, yes, indeed.
But basically three. So first of all,
couldn't we do something like that for the Ukrainian people? Yes, in fact, we are doing it already. They are entering Europe. They can enter without any passport or something like that. But could we not just say these are European citizens? And we defend them.
So let's take them one by a time. These two questions. So the first one is, why is Putin fearing European Union or Ukraine European Union and
the Western
NATO
values? Yes.
May I invite you, Vittorio, to make us for opening remarks?
Thank you very much. I mean, obviously, we must distinguish, as almost always in politics, between what politicians say and what are the true motivations. Clearly, the pretended justification of this war is the so-called fear of encirclement of Russia by NATO countries. The fear is absurd for various reasons. First of all, around a tenth of the borders of Russia, which is the by far largest country on earth, have neighbors that are NATO members. And second, the behavior of Putin shows that he ultimately does not fear the NATO at all, and certainly he does not fear the EU. He deeply despises the EU. So clearly this is only put forward in order to give the public opinion of the world some shadow of justification. The fear is, I think, Fernando, what you ventilated, and it's a very serious fear. It's the fear that if for the first time in an East Slavic country, we have the regular process of change of governments, his own system will lose its legitimacy. That was one of the reasons why, for example, in 2020, he helped Lukashenko to intervene and to forge the elections in the country. He cannot accept that the two other East Slavic countries developed toward the model of Western democracy, where it belongs to the great privileges of us, that we can vote a government that we do not trust anymore out of office. So I think this is great part of the fear, but it is not simply fear. I do think that Putin is deeply rooted in a geopolitical thinking. In fact, one of the most important books of Russia in the last decades was Alexander Dugin's Основы geopolitiki, the Foundations of Geopolitics, in which fundamentally he already writes the program of what we are seeing now, that the falling apart of the Soviet Union was a terrible catastrophe, and that we are called to restore the unity of the Soviet Union. That is what drives him. And on the one hand, there is obviously an individual power drive. He wants to have as much power as possible within Russia, but if he can extend the territory of Russia, then he has even more power, not necessarily more intense, but more extensive power. The other aspect is, of course, that Putin is a nationalist. He believes that the ultimate criterion of belonging to a state is nationhood, and at the same time he denies that the Ukrainians are an own nation. Now the interesting thing is that one of the most hopeful things that we have witnessed in the last month is that not only the Ukrainian-speaking Ukrainians, but also the large majority of the Russian-speaking Ukrainians are fighting against Putin. And by this, they show that for them, it's much, much more important to live in a country which is based on the rule of law, which has a democracy, doubtless with still a lot of problems, than to live under the autocracy of a leader who happens to speak their own language. I wish that the Austrians in 1938 had behaved similarly when Hitler invaded Austria. Of course, there were a lot of Austrians who preferred absolutely to be independent than to be forcefully united with a country that claimed to belong to the same nation. So this, I think, are the motivations. Recently, I read an article in The Atlantic about a book by a former member of the Russian parliament. He at that time in the 90s belonged even to Yabloko, to the Liberal Party. But it has a beautiful title, Treti Imperi, which means the Third Empire, which is deliberately reminiscent of the Third Reich. The First Reich is, of course, the Tsarian Empire, the second, the Soviet Empire. And this book, published in 2007, already anticipates that under Vladimir the Great, the territory of the former Soviet Union will be reunited, and that the West will be unable to do anything against it because it is in generally too weak and too decadent, and secondly, because it's dependent on the resources from Russia.
Thank you for that. I want to go to Yaroslav. Yaroslav, do you want to add something or maybe something?
I may just footnote to what just Vittorio said, but I believe also have to add some other information dimension. I would agree profoundly with Vittorio. This is about geopolitics, but I would say it's about very clear geopolitics, because recently it's not even restoration of the empire what is on the mind of the Putin. I would recommend, or I suggest, refer to the two very important books. One is called by Michel Vilchenino. He is a French philosopher, or Russian-speaking, and he wrote a book of Голове Putina, What's in the Mind of Putin. And second is Timothy Snyder, whom everybody knows, wrote it on freedom. And they try to say, really got into mind of Putin, and basically what they concur, both of them, there is one rather obscure philosopher whom nobody really knew or know, but he made a profound impact on the way of thinking of Putin, and the name is Ilyin.
Ivan Ilyin.
Ivan Ilyin. He's second, probably even third-rated philosopher, but ideologist, fascist type. And it's not just about the Chapot, it's about metaphysics.
Oh,
It's the most dangerous. It's a metaphysics. And basically, the story is that Russia has a special mission. And the mission is to save the world from corruption of the West. And this is historically for several centuries like that the West wants to put Russia on the knees, and like by Napoleon or by Hitler, and by that, by threatening Russia, they threaten the whole global geopolitics and say the life of the future of the world, so to say. And then, in the times of the deepest crisis, Russia quite of a sudden raised from the knees and saved the world. And it's said always by somebody who nobody knew before. That was just like a simple man who came from the back of the screen. Because who would know about Stalin at the beginning of the 20th century, or about Putin in 1991? There must be common man that became a great man, so to say. And why is that? Because he's chosen by the God. It's a God choice. Yeah. So what I'm saying, it's extremely clear. It's a metaphysics. I would be happy to do some pragmatic issues, because if this is the pragmatic issues, then we could sit by the table of negotiation and negotiate borders of the kind of things. Because what basically, and this is, you probably know the name Alexei Benedictov. Benedictov has been director of the Echo Moskvy, one of the most famous, popular radio, which has been closed a month ago, banned by Putin. And since Benedictov knows Putin as a close person, and also has a leaks, so what Benedictov keeps saying, that Putin doesn't believe he's fighting Ukraine. That's not his idea. Mm-hmm. He believes he's fighting the West on the Ukrainian territory.
Yes.
He's fighting the NATO. For him, Ukraine doesn't really exist, and Ukraine doesn't exist either. So basically, just creation by the NATO, by the West. This is another danger. Another, should say, how should I say, COVID, yes. Whatever, I don't know how to put it. Something that has been created artificially by the West to undermine Russia. So what I'm saying is, it's a kind of it's very strange. It's a kind of mixture of Dostoevsky and Hitler.
Yes,
and it's make extremely dangerous.
That.
It was extremely dangerous because, yes. And basically they say he's gone mad. He's gone mad because first thing, being 22 years in power, without any kind of serious rival, and he feels that he feels he has no rival, not just in Russia but in the whole world, because he believes the oldest West are their weaklings, and that was being proved in Syria and in Belarus and recently Kazakhstan. So he believes this is the 20 years. And secondly, 2 years in the where he's fighting himself from the COVID. So just general opinion in this, he's got really mad. He has been that way probably 10 years ago or 5 years ago.
You call this a footnote, Yaroslav. So
it's a long footnote, but this is very dangerous footnote.
But I would like to ask Vittorio, if I read your book of the centennial of the Russian Revolution, so to say, and your first chapter is basically about Dostoevsky and Russian literature, and that refers somehow, if I listen to Yaroslav, about what Yaroslav was talking about this mission and this relationship to metaphysics. But in itself is something ideological or dangerous, or keeps you out of your contact with reality in a certain sense, so to say. Yeah? But maybe you can say something about that.
Yeah, I myself, by the way, consider my own thinking very metaphysical. So I'm not against metaphysics. I am against bad metaphysics. And in fact, in my book on Hegel, who was a great metaphysician, I have a long footnote against Ivan Ilyin, because Ivan Ilyin wrote several books on Hegel, and they're really terribly bad. And I criticized them already in the 1980s. I did not know that he would become a very important leader of a later political development, but I looked at them because he died in Switzerland. He lived many years in Germany and then went to Switzerland. So I was interested, what does a Russian expert on Hegel say? And I was shocked how bad they were, how little understanding of what are the real structures of Hegel thought, and particularly the complete missing of the fact that Hegel gives a metaphysical foundation of the constitutional liberal state. That is what he does. So the opposite of the fascist ideas of Mr. Ilyin. So I'm completely in agreement with Yaroslav that bad metaphysics like that of Ilyin is very dangerous, but I'm not prepared to say metaphysics as such is bad. This as an interesting note on the figure. It's also important, by the way, Ilyin died, as I said, in Switzerland. But in 2005 or something like this, so long time ago, his corpse and that of his wife were transferred from Switzerland back to Russia. A little bit like you do it in the old times when you have the transportation of the relics of a saint from one place to the other. And the whole process was organized by Nikita Mikhalkov. Who is Nikita Mikhalkov? Nikita Mikhalkov is one of the best Russian film directors. I must say some of his works are masterpieces. Some of the works that he did still in the Soviet Union, like Slave of Love, but also some of the works done later. Famous work is Burned by the Sun, on the great purges under Stalin. The main character has similarities to Tukhachevsky. So clearly, he is a very gifted film director. He is, by the way, the son of the poet who wrote the national hymn both for the old Soviet Union and then for independent Russia. And he's the brother of Mikhalkov-Koncharovsky, Sergei Mikhalkov-Koncharovsky, whom I met once at a conference in Oxford, and some years ago wrote a terrible essay in the Spiegel, in which he said, yes, Russia has a lot of problems, but there's one moment in which Russia gets at its best: in war. When we have finally a war, every Russian knows what counts, all the littleness and corruption disappears, and we all work together for a common purpose. And that is the idea of the two Mikhalkov brothers. And clearly, I think Yaroslav is absolutely right. Putin has a lot of Hitler. I mean, again, the fact that the successful novel in 2007 has the title The Third Empire or The Third Reich shows where the journey goes. Also, Hitler, inspired by Meij van den Broek, wanted to reconstruct the Third Empire after the first of the Holy Roman Empire and the Second Empire under the leadership of Prussia. So we have a very similar idea. All this decadent West has to be overcome by a project, and the social glue for this new project can ultimately only grow in a war. Therefore, the war does not only have the purpose to annex land that is supposed to be Russian, it's also a means to wield the Russian people together. Already before the invasion, there was a terrible speech of Putin. I mean, I was convinced in December already the war is inevitable. But after the speech, I think in January, only an illuded person could still believe that diplomacy could solve the problem, which he addressed the Russian people and said, the greatness of his people is that you can endure suffering, poverty, and misery for a great cause. That is the same type of speech that Hitler was using. But at the same time, I think it's very important what Yaroslav and Ruud said. There is Dostoevsky in the background, or better perhaps, the old Slavophilian ideas. And this is a general problem that is not easy to solve. Montesquieu writes in L'Esprit de Loi in the middle of the 18th century that something extraordinary happened during his lifetime. He was born in the 17th century, that Europe became the most powerful continent. And in fact, historians later confirmed that, for example, between 500 and 1700, the Chinese development was much better than the European. They used resources much more reasonable, they had more energy, they were technologically very innovative. But it changes in the 18th century. And in the 19th and early 20th century, the European model spreads almost everywhere, to a large amount through violence, colonialism, but also through the sheer power of the European ideas. For the non-European countries, this was hard. Until today, the Arab world, the Chinese world struggles with the question, how do we, with our own culture, relate to this Western culture? And they have not solved the problem that this ascent of Europe poses. But in the case of Russia, the problem is much worse, because on the one hand, Russia is very different from Europe. But on the other hand, they really believe that they are the true essence of Europe because they are the third Rome. They are the true heirs of Constantinople, and they have inherited the feeling that this was the legitimate form of Christianity. And clearly, I read your article, Yaroslav, a few weeks ago in the Süddeutsche Zeitung, where you speak about the special geographical and cultural, geopolitical and also cultural position of Ukraine. Ukraine was always quite different from the other parts of the East Slavic nations, even if around 1000 there was one language spoken in that huge area. It was different. For example, people often don't know that in the 10th century, before the baptism of 987, when the Slavic pagans accepted Christianity under Vladimir, his grandmother, Olga, had already accepted Christianity, but the Catholic branch. And this was not accepted by the population, and then Kyiv became an integral part of the Orthodox Church. But already in the 10th century, there was a short time where the leadership of Ukraine was Catholic. And clearly, particularly Western Ukraine, we speak with a professor at the Catholic University of Ukraine, particularly Western Ukraine, which till 1919, Galicia belonged to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and before was very strongly under the influence of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, had a completely different openness to Western culture than, for example, Moscow. And this explains why there is a fault line, there is a cultural fault line somewhere through Ukraine between the Orthodox world turned towards Asia and the more Western world. Now, when I spent 4 months in the Soviet Union in 1990, which belonged to the most interesting months of my life, at that time I remember I heard from nationalist Russians, we are the shit, the shield that defends the West and Christianity against the barbarians of the East. I must say, I think Ukraine is the shield that defends the liberal constitutional state in Europe against the barbarians in the East that do not sit in Ulaanbaatar, but in Moscow. That is my opinion. But in the self-understanding of these people, that is often inspired by the Slavophiles of the 19th century, another important figure is, of course, Danilevsky. Danilevsky was a quite impressive and universal mind. And he developed the idea that, he wrote this book, Europe and Russia, that Europe and Russia, he has an almost dualistic system, are two completely different mindsets. On the one hand, of course, Russia is based on the Orthodoxy, which is the true religion, while both Catholicism and Protestantism are corrupted forms of Christianity. But second, another very important difference is the idea that Europe is violent, while the Russian people is absolutely peaceful, which doesn't seem to be the case in the moment. And the third basic difference is Europe is, Western Europe, he calls Europe, Western Europe, Europe in general, is split by party struggle, We don't have parties in Russia. We have one unitarian spirit of the people. And all these are ideas that are more and more building up in the last decades. They were, by the way, already present at the end of the Soviet Union. I may mention an anecdote. In 1990, I was invited after my 4 months in Moscow on a cruise in the Black Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean organized by the Soviet government. There were a lot of politicians, members of both the Soviet, but also of regional parliaments. And it was an extraordinarily intensive and fascinating time. But I was extraordinarily surprised that one day some of the passengers of the ship put on a board on a ship that was full of KGB agents pictures of Tsar Nikolai II and all his family. And they showed deepest veneration for him. It was still Soviet Union. The KGB did not do anything to prevent that. And of course, I'm horrified by the murder of Tsar Nikolai and his family. But I never understood how people could admire this guy. Well, shortly afterwards, he was canonized by the Russian Orthodox Church. I also remember how a colleague came to me and he told me he must explain to me something. All the evils of the world come from the Jews and the Freemasons. Russia went the wrong way because of the Jews and the Freemasons. They are the greatest dangers, and we have to purify the country by not only getting rid of the communists, but of getting rid of the cancer that is behind communism, and these are the Jews and the Freemasons. So all these were ideas that were openly discussed on this ship that was still sailing under the flag of the Soviet Union in 1990. And all this became stronger and stronger. And of course, a big question is, how much do the Soviet elites believe this? How much do they use it as an ideology to garner power? I think the answer is somewhere a mixture, depending on the various persons, as it was a mixture in the Third Reich. Himmler believed in the Germanic ideology. I'm very sure that Goering did not believe in it. He was an absolute cynic and power positivist, and who embraced any other ideology as long as it allowed for his lifestyle.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for your extensive answer, Vittorio. Maybe it's also time a bit to change to our second question. So, I would ask Yaroslav to reflect about it. Is how Fernando phrased it as why does Ukraine and Ukrainians put their hope on Europe? Yeah. So choose the European way. In fact, exactly, it's as I was in Maidan in 2014, you know, and of course, and indeed you could see as much as Ukrainian flags as European flags by the way. So in that sense, so. How would you see that, Yaroslav? Is that a good?
I have to disagree to a certain extent. We don't love Europe that much. We are rather skeptical about Europe as it is right now.
Yes.
We are very skeptical about European Union.
So you're more like the Europeans, like Europe, in that sense.
I mean, we believe it's useless. I'm sorry to say that. In the case of real danger. It couldn't provide anything. It really goes beyond slogans. And most of the politicians could not keep up, so to say, to the promises, what they did about the European civilization, all the kind of things. So I'm saying we are not falling in love with Europe as it is. We fall in love with the ideal Europe, which is different thing.
Yes, yes. Yeah,
because we believe, what, if I may continue or extend what Vittorio just said.
Yes.
I believe that what everything boils down is to the values and the metaphysics about values, because you couldn't have a values without metaphysics. And one of my favorite authors is Adam Michnik, and he has a great book, Conversation with Václav Havel, like 10 years after the collapse of the communism, and basically they both came to the consensus that what Europe needs badly is a good political metaphysics. You have to explain why it's worthwhile to fight for Europe.
Yeah.
Because values is basically something it is worth fight for. Mm-hmm. You sacrifice something In the worst case, even your life, so to say. This must be some kind, how should I say, metaphysical explanation, because you just can't fight for money or any kind of the things. So this is basically our Maidan was about values, and I believe it's European values. Because at the core of these values, you believe two things. First is dignity, which you believe essential European value, and we share it. And second, idea of emancipation, idea of liberty, so to say. So this is two values that we believe that we worth fighting for. Mm-hmm. It's not metaphysics, it's just probably a feeling. But basically it's a feeling that explains why people that had such a big solidarity and they were ready to sacrifice that for the case. Now I would say that what we have now, and it just is probably as a remark, we have this on Maidan only, and Maidan didn't cover all of Ukraine. Maidan covered only several parts of Ukraine, including Western Europe, Western Ukraine. Nowadays, you have the spirit of Maidan everywhere. It's a kind of amazing thing. Even in the most Russian-speaking cities like Odessa and Kharkiv, you should read newspapers. Look at the YouTubes. They talk in the language of Maidan. Even so, they're not aware that they're talking language of Maidan, and they're talking Russian. But this is basically the same feeling, and most importantly, feeling of solidarity. The most amazing sentiment that we have experienced, it's an unbelievable solidarity. And solidarity stems from the feeling, how should I say, I'm sorry, it's probably banality, but feeling of the law, sympathy to somebody who's near you, because he or she is sacrificing, put his life to a danger to some extent as you do. And it's great, emerging feeling. I know from the veterans of the Solidarność, the famous Polish anti-communist movement, they say we had the same feeling 20 years ago. They recognize this feeling, you know? And I believe it's exactly the feeling that you miss, Europeans. Yes. You don't really remember that because you succeeded in the political transformation, economic reforms, but basically it has a down coast.
I like because
it's comfort.
Yes.
And once you have a comfort, you tend to forget many things. There's a beautiful book, very impressive book, Inkelhardt, on the changes and democratization, values and democratization. It basically says then people have a lot of the comfort, they have a self-generational comfort. People are not ready to fight and sacrifice anything, so to say. So what I'm saying here, that we are not fighting for the European Union as it is. We need European resources without a doubt, because without resources, since this is war of attrition, we couldn't have the same, we could not stand with Russian resources because much more bigger. But once we have access to the European resources and to North American resources, we have better chances. But again, it's not just pragmatics. It's not about pragmatics. It's really about metaphysics.
Yes.
And what I'm saying here, it's probably sounds strange, but this is our, how to say, challenge, because somehow we have to create this kind of metaphysics. We have to think, or to write, rethink, whatever, invent, whatever, but something has to be done, because this is new experience which has to be somehow articulated. Some kind of manifesto, I would say, yeah. After the experience of Solidarność, after the experience of the two Maidans in Ukraine, after experience this war, there's something, new arises. The most important thing, and this for me is very important thing, why we need this kind of the new metaphysics. Because I believe what happened in Maidan and what's happening now in Ukraine. Basically, if I may boil down again to the very simple conclusion, and I'm sorry to sound too banal, what Ukrainian shows is that postmodernism is dead. Finally.
Yes.
Finally, postmodernism is dead.
In fact, we came to the same conclusion, Ruud and me.
Yeah, but you have to have the experience, because probably you have the conclusion as intellectuals.
But Yaroslav,
I'm always thinking about this like I'm not so this I always loved a couple of things about the European as it is, not as it could be, but as it is.
So the thing is, if I may finish at some point, yeah.
Yes.
So what we believe, we don't believe that we will enter European Union and we will get European Union what we want. Our ambition to come into union and to help to change the European Union.
Yes.
Because I don't believe the European Union is not sustainable anymore. The crucial idea is sustainability. And to have a sustainability, you have to talk about values. And to talk about the values, you have to have some political metaphysics.
Yes.
These kind of things. And this is a challenge for all of us. Those who are dealing with the history, philosophy, social sciences, religious sciences, all the kind of things. This is the challenge.
Yes, in fact, this was the idea of the conversation of today, because if we come to this conclusion that we need a
I'm sorry. One thing we forgot, because basically Putin is speaking value-loaded language. He believes he stands for values, but these values are traditional values of the Rus, of the Christianity, of the Orthodoxy. And therefore, he is that popular among the conservative, radical left and radical right, because they both trying to take this kind of longer values. What I'm saying here, the liberal democracy is the best solution, without a doubt, but liberal democracy forgot to speak language of values.
Well, I would like a few comments on that. So to say, I would protest against the idea that the European Union is not a union of values. So I totally wouldn't agree with that. And also that the European Union is, at least as part of it, what I'm living in, is believing especially in one specific value, what is basically at the heart of the European Union, and is the value of freedom, of course, liberty. That's what we are protecting. That's where we created from out the European Union, the European Union Court of Justice, the European Parliament, for instance, something like that. You can say, okay, but it has no real meaning or it doesn't change anything, but it does say that the European Union is not a value community. I think that community would be the wrong word, by the way. But it is the best thing you can say is it is a community of a union of democracies based on the rule of law, and that's not a small thing. And the second thing, okay, you could say the European Union failed. Well, okay, that's one thing to say about it. I think you are the historian, you're an historian minded, and so that projects in history fails is not quite so surprising, so to say. And so the most of the thing is what we can learn about it, of course, so to say, that we don't repeat the same failures again. So this is a bit, and the third is about metaphysics. I'm not so convinced that we need the metaphysics. And I always think a bit like one of our most important postmodern philosophers, if I may say so, and it depends a bit how you read them, to see history as a kind of a process of supplement, and Derrida. So not as a dialectical unfolding of an idea, but something adding to it. So the European Union added something to our history of mankind. And I think Ukraine, and in that sense, Yaroslav knows in a lot of sense, I totally agree with you, adds something to this history, of course. It teaches, that's what we said already at Maidan, Ukraine teaches Europe a lesson, so to say. That was more or less a narrative as I told it, so to say. So this is a bit my remarks on your comments on that. So I'm not quite convinced that European Union is not built on values. I'm not convinced that it's not a successful project. It was an immensely successful project. And I may be convinced that it is not sustainable, but that's something else.
Vittorio, would you respond or should I?
Yes.
Who will you go ahead?
Vittorio.
Perhaps I can say a few things. First of all, I want to say how much I share the complaints of Yaroslav. Of course, Ruud is right that the European Union is based on values, the values that are expressed in the legal substance of the European Union. However, what I think Yaroslav has in mind is something different. He does not deny that freedom, constitutional law, leading to democracy are crucial principles of the European Union. What he means is that Europe has forgotten that you have to fight for these values.
Exactly.
It's not sufficient to write a list of values and say we love them and then go to business as usual. That, I think, is your point. And in many aspects, what we are witnessing now is the collapse of the post-heroic mentality. The post-heroic mentality was a mentality that seemed to spread in the last decades after the silly book by Fukuyama on the end of history, that the transition to democracy and market societies has been done forever, and that we are now, there is no struggle going on anymore. We will have only slowly to implement everywhere this model. And that's not how it worked out. And I do think that even if, of course, the Russian culture is in many aspects much more primitive than the legal culture of the European Union is to a large amount, not completely, characterized by this post-heroic attitude where dignity fundamentally shrinks to the idea what's good for me, to radical individualism, and that you do not have people anymore who are willing to fight and to die and to kill. That is what happens in wars, in order to maintain that. And the Ukrainians teach us a very, very important lesson by showing that they are willing to do that. And I often think that I've lived now for more than 20 years in the United States. One of the reasons why the people in Eastern Europe, Ukrainians, but also some members of the EU in Eastern Europe, often trust America more than Western Europe is that they understood that America always had a clear conscience that it's not sufficient to have a good legal culture. You must have also armed forces that back it up. While most European countries completely forgotten it. I mean, my own country, Germany, which is the economically most powerful country in the European Union, one of the economically most successful countries ever, is simply in a desolate situation with regard to its self-defense. And when they now say, well, we will put 100 million, forgive me, a billion in the build-up of our army, that's fine, it's long overdue, but money alone will not help us because you need people behind the arms. And if you think that you can simply solve geopolitical challenges like that one only by putting money into it, you are completely wrong. You need people who are willing to fight. And that will be much more difficult to build up in Western Europe. And therefore, I think we owe an enormous debt of gratitude, and we should at least be financially generous towards the Ukrainians because they do the hard job. And what they have deserved through their heroic resistance is that they will enter the European Union soon after this terrible war is over. And indeed, we have to learn from the virtues that you have displayed in this conflict. On the other hand, I also want to warn against the belief that this war will be quickly over. There are various great dangers that still are there, even if fortunately Putin was not able to achieve his aim. He really believed in a few days to conquer Kyiv and most of the Ukraine. This fortunately, thanks to the heroic attitude of the Ukrainians, did not work out. But it is possible that Putin will use the most terrible weapons that exist. And that is a real possibility for which we must be prepared. After all, also in Syria and in Chechnya, the Russians did not gain their aims immediately. There were various wars against Chechnya, but after the horrific policies pursued under the presidency of Putin, they were able to erase Grozny and put in Kadyrov. So it's not so that Putin will step back easily. That's not the way how this person functions, and particularly since he knows that this is very dangerous for his own survival, he will do almost everything that he can to avoid that. Second problem, my great fear is, based on Yaroslav's realistic diagnosis of the Western European temper, is that in a few months, Even if the war of attrition goes on and worsens, Europeans will be tired and would like to see in the news more about the divorce affair of actor and actress so and so. And that this will disappear from the focus of the debate. And the third big danger is, how will China relate? Will China say now the moment has come, in the West is so occupied with the problem, to attack Taiwan? And will this lead to fundamentally the forming of a fault line in the world between America and Europe on the one hand, and China and Russia on the other hand? Will the Chinese try to moderate, because perhaps it's not in their long-term interest if the war goes on? Will they lean back and see how perhaps Russia and the West destroy each other to be the laughing third at the end? We don't know.
Maybe we already at 8:30, so we promised to do it in 1 hour, and I want to keep to that.
So you mean we have to finish?
I enjoyed it very much, but I have this one last question for you, and for all the three of you. So this word "fight" is coming back, and it seems a bit like a stupid questions to ask, but because with this whole idea of broadcasting, don't give up Ukraine, is of course built on the idea we have to fight. But the question is why do you have to fight for these values? So why does the fight come in, so to say? Because it seems something like a common sense idea, but I don't think it's that common sense, so to say. We don't have very much. It's basically also related to the bad metaphysics, maybe, Vittorio, but we have not so promising experiences with fighting for values, so to say, in this horrible 20th century. So if you may ask you a short comment, why should we fight for the good values? Fernando, maybe I can ask you then, Fernando, yes. And then Vittorio, and then Yaroslav has the last word.
Yes, in fact, I also would like to turn this question into another question, which is similar, because even if we were able to fight and we were motivated to fight, we have nuclear power in front of us. So how could we do it? Not only why, but how? And that's why I propose to maybe have other means to engage the Ukrainian people in the European Union by giving them citizenship or something like that, which is independent of geopolitical or conventions between nations, but just from people to people or something like that. But I was looking for how could we fight in another mode, because it is impossible to fight, even if we want to, against Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't agree with Fernando. I think that what Fernando is saying is on the one hand, of course, correct. We need to try to win this battle on all possible levels. In fact, also Putin, who conceived this war a long time ago, at least 15 years ago, if not longer, in the book by Dugin that I quoted at the beginning, it is explicitly said, the war will come at the end. First, we have to use propaganda. Then we have to make the West dependent on our enormous natural resources. So, of course, we have to use in this battle argumentation, also outright propaganda, as we did during the Cold War, to try to convince the Russian people about the horrors of their regime. And we have to use also economic pressure. But ultimately, it's naive to believe that you can ward off a danger present in the form of violence only by good words and by economic sanctions. Ultimately, you must be able also to fight for them, because otherwise your values will disappear. I remember when I was young in the 1980s, and there was a debate about the rearmament in Germany, there was this sentence of naive people: imagine there's war and nobody goes there. Well, then it's fine. But imagine there's war and only one side goes there. Yeah. Then the other side and their values will be defeated and annihilated. And therefore, I do think we must keep up the spirit of fight, and we should also not accept the blackmail of nuclear threat by Russia. It will come in the next.
How do we do that?
Months. Well, as we did it in the Cold War, through the equilibrium of deterrence. We were all happy when it disappeared, but in the moment, we have to mentally prepare us to return to it. But Yaroslav must have the last word.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Vittorio could hardly say it better than me. But I probably provide some examples to be a bit further. There are Ukrainian writers, they two brothers, Karpanos, and they one put it very nicely. He said, yes, you say that everything could be sold and bought. So for what money I could buy your daughter?
Yeah.
So there is no money that you could sell your daughter, which means your daughter is a value. Yes. The thing that they have no price is exactly value. More than that, it's not just a thing that has no price, that is ready to sacrifice something for this. Because basically, Ruud, what I'm saying, I'm afraid, it's a declared values. This is what we're declaring that we believe in. But when challenges come, when they're threatened, are we really ready to defend them, to fight them? Let's face it, we all are mortal. Sooner or later, we die. But what if we already die for? Is there a thing that we really think they have values? Because most of the big values, they are now, how to say, discomforted. They believe this is great narrative, meta-narrative. You have, this is kind of probably dangerous thing to say. You have to be more pragmatic, all the kind of thing. And this, I believe, is a danger for European Union. I believe there are two good things about Europe and European Union. First of all, I believe that we have many reasons to complain and to say and to blame European Union for many things, and it deserves. But one thing is essentially that you could imagine fathom a war in European Union between two neighboring countries. That's the most important achievement. And therefore, we want to go to European Union because once European Union, we shouldn't fight. We go under umbrella of the territory of no war. Yes. This is very important for us. This is real, very real things to say. And I believe European Union works here, that without a doubt. And secondly, this I'm talking about historians. You know, this talk about the demise of Europe. This talk, mostly Russian, but not only Russian, talks that Europe is corrupt, is going to decline, it's the end of Europe, end of history. We hear this, we read these stories, narratives for the last 200 years. If you read the Russian text from the beginning of the 19th century, already have this kind of ideas that Europe is corrupted and is endangered the real values and has to be defended. So what I'm saying here, that yes, Europe is a crisis. It's a constant crisis. But what is good about European crisis, that from most of the crises come a solution, a new solution, like European Union after the Second World War, as a no-war territory, so to say.
I hope so.
So in a sense, I applaud for this crisis. I was waiting for this crisis because European has to be reloaded, so to say. This is a crisis, and we have to find a solution for this crisis, which could be sustainable. And I believe Ukraine is a part of the solution. This is what I really meant. Okay, you could say that European Union has a value thing like that, but what about Srebrenica? What about Mariupol? We're just watching, basically. And what about the idea of Dostoevsky that all of the world is not worth of tear of a kid? But there's several hundred kids already has been perished under the war. So what is the Europe is looking for, so to say? What I'm saying here, I'm saying it's a kind of mixture. I'm not saying this is just values. I'm sorry. I know this politics about realistic, but this must be realistic politics which has some new legitimacy, so to say. What I'm saying here, and legitimacy is a kind of a challenge that we have to work on, like humanitarians, because this is basically their work. This we get our salaries for, we paid for to look for the things. So in a sense, I'm looking. It probably would be hard to say, but still I have to say, I'm looking so positively to Ukrainian crisis, European crisis, because I believe we could come with some kind of workable solution. But this solution could not be just realistic, pragmatic, because it also had touched upon the values, so to say.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your last words, Yaroslav, and thank you all for being here. The answer for my fighting walks nowadays to my home. It's a little girl from Lviv who is 3 years old, so to say, and it really changed my life immensely. So I really can't cope with it yet. We have an Ukrainian flag at our home, you know. It's like extended Lviv. So, but I'm laughing about it, but I'm very serious about it. So it's really affecting also. It's affecting the world. It is affecting Europe, but it is affecting us all as individuals existentially, so to say, in finding answers who are not easy. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to look for them, so to say. And it's basically what we did in this hour. And I'm very grateful for your being here. And I'll come back to you again. So thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruud.
Thank you so much for your support.
Thank you, Yaroslav.
Thank you, Vittorio. Thank you, Yaroslav. Thank you, Fernando. See you next time.